This shows that the enemy is not static. He evolves his strategies based on the strengths and tactics of his opponents, making inherited knowledge potentially obsolete. The tragedy of the great-grandfather Ahmed Hassan serves as the paradigm for how the enemy operates. He is the ideal first victim, successful, honest, and hardworking. His downfall is orchestrated in distinct stages. First, the setup. Arif creates a crisis, isolating Ahmed by severing his business relationships and crippling his operations covertly, making it seem like a string of bad luck. The enemy is consistently outsmarting them, proving that brute force or simple honesty is not enough. It requires a level of strategic thinking that matches or exceeds the enemy's own. Finally, the story achieves a deep personalization of fear. The horror is deeply personal because it attacks what each man holds dear. For Ahmed, it was his business and dignity. For Zafar, it was his truth and physical integrity. The enemy tailors the ruination to the individual, making the fear unique and inescapable. In conclusion, the first three chapters establish a powerful narrative framework where the antagonist is an intellectual and adaptive force rather than a mindless monster. The tragedies of Ahmed Hassan and Zafar Ahmed demonstrate that the enemy's goal is not mere death, but the comprehensive destruction of identity, legacy, and spirit through economic manipulation, psychological terror, and physical threat. This sets the stage for the next generation, where the father attempts a different strategy: escape. The fourth chapter of the story, focusing on the father Imran, Zafar, introduces a new strategy in the multi-generational war: avoidance. His decision to flee is, in many ways, the most rational response to the trauma documented in the family diaries. Having seen his grandfather driven to suicide and his father crippled for attempting to fight, he concludes that engagement is futile. His strategy is one of radical minimization through geographical and professional withdrawal. He moves to a small town and becomes a teacher, a profession with low stakes and minimal public profile. He deliberately avoids any venture, especially business, that could make him a target. This is a strategy of invisibility. If you don't build anything, the enemy has nothing to tear down. He also employs information suppression, choosing not to tell his son about the curse as a protective measure, an attempt to break the psychological chain of inheritance. Imran's approach is a testament to the profound psychological impact the enemy has had. The family has been traumatized to the point where the only perceived option is to hide. His life is defined not by ambition, but by the absence of it, life lived in the shadow of the enemy even without direct contact. However, the story cruelly demonstrates that the enemy's reach is inescapable, and Imran's plan fails for several reasons. The enemy does not only attack ambition and success, it attacks life itself. Imran's illness is a random human event, but in the context of this curse, it becomes a weapon. The hospital expenses lead to debt, the very same economic weapon used against his great-grandfather. This shows that the enemy can exploit any vulnerability, even those inherent in a simple, cautious life. You don't need to be a wealthy merchant to be ruined. A teacher with medical bills is just as susceptible. This highlights the active nature of the curse. The inheritance is not passive but a seeking force. Imran's attempt to live a quiet life does not nullify the curse. It merely changes the battlefield, and the enemy adapts its tactics to the circumstances. If you won't come to the battle will come to you. Furthermore, while not explicitly stated, keeping such a massive secret from his son would have weighed heavily on Imran. The fear and anxiety of potentially being discovered by the enemy, or of the enemy striking regardless, likely dominated his life, meaning he was still living in fear, which is another form of ruination. The incomplete sentence, "job," at the end of the father's story is symbolic, suggesting that his job, his life's attempt at safety, was insufficient. The debt incurred from his illness proves that his escape was an illusion. The enemy wins by demonstrating that no strategy based on avoidance can succeed. The conflict is mandatory. The protagonist, upon reading the diaries after his father's death, is now in a unique and daunting position. He has the knowledge of 3 generations of failure. He knows that direct confrontation led to humiliation and suicide, public exposure led to disability, and avoidance led to debt and implied despair. His dilemma is profound. What strategy remains? The enemy has proven itself superior in economic warfare, public relations, and in exploiting the vulnerabilities of a quiet life. The protagonist cannot fight the same war his ancestors did. His advantage, however, is the cumulative knowledge of the enemy's patterns. He understands that Aerith is intelligent, adaptive, patient, and focused on control and ruination, not just death. He also knows that Aerith was vulnerable to exposure, as seen with the grandfather's initial impact, but is capable of countering it. Therefore, the protagonist must fight a battle that Aerith cannot easily adapt to. This might involve strategies like digital immortality and public archive, using the internet to create an immutable, globally accessible record of Aerith's activities that cannot be erased, thus countering his ability to silence sources. He could embrace vulnerability by going public with his story before being attacked, framing himself as a whistleblower, which would make any subsequent attack appear as validation of his claims. A psychological reversal, where he adopts a strategy of non-reaction or by documenting his life openly to drain the enemy's power of secrecy, could be effective. Finally, seeking unconventional alliances with the other family's Aerith targets could form a collective resistance, a network that shares information and resources, presenting a challenge Aerith has not faced before. Is ultimately a story about the inevitability of certain conflicts and the evolution of resistance. The enemy, Aerith, represents the timeless, adaptive nature of evil or oppression that each generation must face with the tools and wisdom at its disposal. The failures of the past are not defeats, but lessons that pave the way for a new approach. The protagonist inherits not just an enemy, but a legacy of courage, the courage of his great-grandfather who built an empire, his grandfather who sought truth, and his father who sought peace. His task is to synthesize these lessons into a strategy that finally turns the tide. The story leaves us with the chilling yet empowering message that some enemies cannot be avoided, only confronted, and that the greatest weapon against an intelligent adversary is an even more intelligent and resilient will. The battle is not of strength, but of wits, and it is a battle that must be fought anew by each generation.